Hi, welcome to Metaverse Brands. I'm your host, Steven Dypiangco. Today, I'm welcoming David Taylor, who wrote an in-depth article on gaming publication Naavik about Roblox unit economics. I absolutely love this article. It really was exciting for me to have somebody write something that I've been thinking about. How do companies, how do game makers, how do brands make money on the Roblox platform if they're investing money and resources towards building experience? Does it make sense? Can they make their money back? How does that all work? And so in the article, David explores how much it costs to make a game, how much it costs to market a game, and then he looks at how much the top games have made on the platform, and then was able to really smartly put together this analysis that said, hey, if you're able to make a top 250 game on the platform, then you can hit break even and cover your costs. And so it was just, to me, super fascinating to read this, and we had a great conversation about this, his article, and we also looked at, from a brand marketing perspective, if break even doesn't make sense, how can you still be effective at spending marketing dollars on a platform like Roblox to reach an audience in a super cost-effective way? It was a super fun conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Check it out. Would love to start off and just understand a little bit about you, your background. Like, just tell us briefly a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, for sure. So sort of my journey into Roblox was a meandering one. I think I spent probably my first 6 years working in the consumer products, food and beverage space in early stage startups. I worked at a company called Back to the Roots, leading product development for them. I worked at a impact venture firm called Propel Capital, and then ended up starting a company sort of as an entrepreneur in residence for another investment firm. And that all led me to get my degree at Berkeley, MBA, MEng dual degree, where I sort of realized I wanted to get into entertainment. Like, I was a creative writing major and philosophy major in college, and wanted to reach back to those roots of storytelling, and found myself getting a internship at EA. And around this time, the pandemic was setting in, and so I realized that class was going to be remote. So I asked EA if they would hire me full time, and we were able to swing that. And so then at EA, I was there for 2 years. I worked on their subscription product as well as what was called commercial ventures, which is basically like looking at sort of trends, technology that were maybe 2 to 5 years out from being sort of mainstream, maybe even longer, and figuring out like, how do you move a 10,000 person company to start to learn about these technologies and be prepared to capture the opportunity that exists in the future. And that's sort of how I started to be introduced to Roblox and the whole metaverse space, was actually through looking at Web3 and familiarizing myself with Sandbox and Decentraland, and then realizing, well, wait a minute, these sort of services already exist. Like, Roblox is doing this in a Web 2 format. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I started to sort of become aware of Roblox and what was possible on the platform. And then I sort of was writing for Naavik, and finally got to go full on into it.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
And I can relate to somebody who kind of has a deep passion for sort of entertainment and creative. In my sort of previous life, I was a filmmaker and a producer and a YouTuber. And now I find myself sort of in the business world and wanting to bring those things together. And certainly it's possible within this sort of world that we're living in now. So let's talk about this article that you wrote. If you can just sort of set up a little bit about like what the article is, what it covers, and sort of like why you decided to write this piece.
Yeah, I can start with sort of why I decided to write it, and then get into what I kind of covered. So basically, I started writing about it because I was noticing that well, I noticed that sort of Sonic had this big activation on Roblox that sort of aligned up with the movie release that they had of
Hmm.
Sonic the Hedgehog 2. And one of the trends we've been noticing at Naavik is really around transmedia and the ways in which these things are sort of all converging on one another. And so I sort of do the breakdown of how Sonic the Hedgehog movie would, um, draw people over to the Roblox game, and the Roblox game would send people to the movies, and how these things could sort of compound on each other. Uh, and I noticed as I was doing this research that the company that had made the game had actually raised like a massive round of venture funding, like $25 million.
We're at Game Fam.
And yeah, and I thought, huh, that's weird, because I always thought that venture capital, as someone who, worked in it, that, we were pursuing opportunities that had, the massive for venture size returns. And the idea that this would happen within a venture, right? Roblox was a venture-backed company eventually, and now there's venture-backed companies that are on the platform.
Right.
That was sort of startling to me, so I really wanted to dig deeper into it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we'll get deeper into the article, but before we do, just a couple thoughts on that. I think Salesforce comes to mind as like a very big venture-backed company that has spun off like multiple unicorns out of it, and the huge ecosystem that it's built. And so like there are a few examples like that of where that type of path is possible. And then it's interesting that you mentioned Sonic because yeah, that is the number one branded experience on the platform. And to me, when I sort of cite that, I say, oh, it's kind of not fair because Sonic was already a video game to begin with, and unlike a lot of other brands entering the platform, entering the space, Sonic is like, oh, we just took the game and we put it onto a new platform, and so like the gameplay is maybe adjusted, modified. It's modified for the platform, but in many ways, it's still just Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yes. I also think maybe that's a good signal that more games should be sort of doing this stuff. And I think there is an audience on Roblox that a lot of gaming IP might be interested in sort of uh, introducing their IP to.
Yeah, that's interesting. And as you pointed out, like it was tied to the movie release, Sonic 2. And so certainly I would imagine that the audience, it's a younger audience that they're trying to reach with that movie. There's a lot of overlap with that audience and Roblox players and demographics. So that makes a ton of sense. So all right, getting back to the article, so we understand a little bit about why, sort of where your interest came from, and then sort of how did you go about tackling this sort of, it's a big topic of unit economics and on the Roblox platform.
Yeah. So I think my curiosity, as I mentioned, sort of stemmed from the sort of, I want to look at this as if I'm a venture capital
Hmm.
investor, right? Which a lot of that comes down to unit economics, thinking about how does this scale up? Like, what's the long-term opportunity? And so in tech, like typically it's like you spend a lot of money to build out a platform, and then that platform scales at zero marginal cost infinitely. And so that's why they raise a ton of money early on. And that's why investors are interested, because they know that of that zero marginal cost, that, that the margin increases the more players you have. But with Roblox, I was curious, like, is that the case here? Is there sort of a, uh, or is there sort of an ongoing operating cost that doesn't scale, that is always sort of linear with the amount of content you're producing? And
just
so,
just to just to jump in there, because
yeah,
the idea with a venture backed business and typically is like, oh, eventually you get to this point where just the returns are so outsized over time. To your point, like after the initial investment, you just keep going up, and it doesn't take as much to keep it going. But it seems like, oh, you were curious, like, does that exist, or is it like, oh no, it's like that sort of ratio, that relationship stays constant throughout, like in terms of the growth, like growth trajectory.
yeah. So like typically like the traditional way of valuing a company is based on sort of doing a discounted cash flow analysis, right? Where you're basically taking all future uh, profit and bring it to present value. And so a big part of that is what are your margins, and will you achieve, as your revenue is growing substantially, are you also improving your margins, and then what is the effect on valuation there?
Got it.
And so diving into the Roblox article, I wanted to look at, what is the revenue? What is the cost?
Right.
And then what is sort of the strategic opportunity potentially in the long term? And that's I broke it down into sort of top line revenue based off of in-game sales. And then we go to some marketing cost, and then the cost to actually produce the game.
Yeah. And so let's tackle those things. So let's look at like, where do you want to start? I know that there's a few different things there, but let's break those down.
Yeah, we can start on the cost side. So from a marketing perspective, there's kind of two primary marketing costs. So one is you can use Roblox's advertising solution, which allows you to get sort of a sponsored placement on their discovery page, and you pay a fairly low amount of money. Like you can get, I don't actually know the numbers off the top of my head, but you can get a lot of impressions for just a few $100s. Like a lot, like a million impressions or so. Like this is like more impressions than you would expect for how little you need to pay. So a single kid developer can potentially start to get some viewers by doing these paid ads. But that kind of runs out. It loses steam pretty quickly. This is what sort of the developers told me, is you've put $1,000 into the system. At a certain point, you stop getting any users back.
Got it.
And so the second way that Roblox developers that I spoke to sort of draw audiences to their games is working with YouTube influencers and having them sort of promote the game and do like a tutorial, or just sort of go through the game, and some of these YouTube influencers have millions of followers. So that's sort of the second way, and that's a lot more expensive, obviously, right? But it's also far more effective. And so from a cost perspective, what does that add up to? One of the from what I've been told, it's sort of anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 for a single video from these influencers. And I'm sure there's smaller influencers that will do it for even less, but sort of those are that's the price tag sort of associated with getting these influencers to promote your game.
Gotcha. So those are the marketing costs. There's some small costs potentially to market on the platform, and then you can spend as much as you want, maybe paying for as many influencers, big influencers as you want. And so there's that piece of it. So the marketing costs, and then I think you also sort of dove into sort of the creation, right, of the game as another cost.
Yeah. So on the creative side, I have to say there were a number. I spoke to 5 or 6 developers. A lot of them venture backed. So these venture backed developers are a little bit less open about their cost economics.
Yeah.
But one developer I spoke to was willing to share sort of the details, and essentially he was saying something along the lines of I have 12 employees, and it takes we do about 4 to 5 games every 6 months. And so I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but essentially what that came out to is roughly $120K per experience.
Right. And so $120K to build, and then I think you had somewhere in the ballpark of $120K to market, something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're
I think it was 60K is what I estimated.
Okay,
yeah.
Got it.
It could go up to 120K. Some people take on 50% of their cost as marketing, but other folks I talked to said that was too much. 60K was probably closer.
Gotcha. So, and I've spoken to a few different developers coming from a brand perspective and saying, hey, if we wanted to hire your agency, how much would it cost as a brand? And I've heard anywhere from let's say 200 to 500,000 to for a brand. Now that's not the cost, right? That's the fee to the brand, right? So maybe the cost that you're hearing in that sort of 120 range is the true cost to create a game.
Yeah, and I think I want to clarify something, which is games vary in terms of their depth and fidelity of graphics, right? And so a game's cost is going to be commensurate with the amount of gameplay that's available and how, detailed the graphics end up being. And so like, on one end, I've heard that like you could spin up a game in a matter of weeks or a month, and that game could be wildly successful, but the core game loop is going to be very deep, right? It's going to be fairly small world that's sort of repetitive gameplay. Like, so it can definitely vary. But I'm sort of just trying to say like let's land on a single number, because if we have too wide of a spectrum, and
Yeah.
obviously like the world is a nuanced place, like it's hard to bring any analysis to it.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. So that's looking at the cost side. And where should we go next?
We could go to the revenue side, I
All
guess.
right, let's do it.
So yeah, so on the revenue side, the way that I approached that was basically off the back of a leak that had been released in the July timeframe, that basically laid out how much revenue each of the top 10 Roblox developers was making. And in addition to that, Roblox had made some sort of offhanded statements throughout, the year about, top 200, top 600 are making this amount of money. So basically, based off of those statements, some like inside details I had gotten from one developer as to like how much revenue, uh, how many studios were making more than $1 million a year. I was able to sort of create a line of best fit through a simple regression analysis to basically project out like how much revenue each place in the top 1,000 or top 2,000, like the model can go on forever, right? And I basically found that sort of the break even point was for generating 180K in revenue was being a top 250 developer.
Got it. Being in the creating one of the top 250 games experiences on the platform.
Yeah, so if you are the 250th best performing game from a monetization perspective, you would make $180,000.
Got it. And it per year.
Yeah.
And is that 250, it's sort of like breaking in to the top 250 all time? Like how does that work over like what period of time? Like how?
Yeah, it was just for 2021. So that
Okay,
was like what the data was for.
got it.
And so yeah, assuming you were a top developer in 2021.
Okay, got it. So let's say so the assumption is, hey, based on costs, what we've heard, surveying different, developers in the ecosystem, we're putting this price at $180,000 to launch a game. And then if you break into the top 250, you're a break even. And that's sort of, let's say, not counting any sort of updates, right? Like those are other costs updating games. But that's sort of, yeah, that's where you landed, that top 250.
Yeah.
Cool. And then so from there, what yeah, I guess, was there other analysis, or that right there was enough to tell you kind of like how the unit economics work on the platform?
Yeah, so that basically tells me sort of, if you want to have a profitable business, right, you need to be making games that are in the top 250. And then the question is, well, how easy is it to break into the top 250, right? And so we know that, over 1 million experiences are made on Roblox every year. And so, it doesn't take an analyst like myself to say like, oh, that doesn't sound easy,
Right.
right? And so I think this maybe gets us to sort of the question around brand marketing,
Hmm.
is that on the one hand, it's very hard to make a profitable game in Roblox, but even an unprofitable game can have tens of millions of plays. And I think that's where where a lot of these studios are finding an opportunity, is the ability to create these brand marketing experiences that are actually super valuable for these bigger brands.
Yeah, and from brands that I've spoken to, that I'm working with, certainly Roblox makes sense as a marketing channel, right? As a way to reach, um, especially younger consumers, Gen Z, Gen Alpha. If you're trying to reach those younger consumers, Roblox is a great place because it has scale, over 50 million daily active users, and right now we're so early. There's not a lot of brands necessarily on the platform, so there's a real opportunity to kind of form a connection, build a great game that has a lot of engagement, a lot of playtime, and so certainly that makes a ton of sense. To go back to the sort of developers then, and like their unit economics for like Roblox development studios, especially those that are VC backed, it seems like they're getting paid in some cases whether the game is a successful top 250 game or not, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, how do you think about like the economics of those businesses, given that, they can make money just by charging a fee and working with a number of brands versus having games that are profitable or even break even?
Yeah. So I think what I'm saying is that there's much more of an opportunity to work with brands because as like a as I mean these are all startups, right? Like they aren't able to monetize the attention that they're getting as well as a brand might, right? So like just thinking about like brand marketing, I quickly looked up like the Super Bowl is a big brand marketing event, right?
Sure.
And like there were 112 million viewers of the Super Bowl last year, and in order to get a 30-second segment, you needed to pay $5.5 million,
Wow.
right? So that roughly comes out to about 5 cents per 30-second viewer. And what's funny about this is like, well, I mean, that's per 30-second viewer, but like people are getting up and eating popcorn in the
Sure,
middle
they
of
might not. Yeah.
commercials and stuff.
Right.
So 5 cents per 30-second viewer, whereas like what was the number you threw out for like what the brands are paying?
Sure. Let's say $500,000.
Okay. So if it's 500K and NARS Color Quest has 30 million viewers, let's say. I haven't looked at the recent numbers,
Sure.
but 30 million views, right? And if the average engagement is like 10 minutes per engagement, right? You're coming out to about like 1.5 cents per 10-minute engagement, right?
Right.
And what we know is that like playing a game is far more engaging than just watching an advertisement. Uh, you have to be physically moving around in this space, and so not only is it far cheaper, it's just a much more memorable experience and a way for people to engage with these brands. So I think when you look at the unit economics of brand marketing, the Roblox opportunity is a no-brainer from a cost perspective.
Yeah, and especially again, if the demo matches, right? If the younger demo is one that you're already interested in reaching, then even more so because that audience currently is so fragmented. They're not necessarily watching linear television or listening to the radio or any of that stuff, and so many are spending time on these types of platforms. So yeah, absolutely, it becomes even more sort of, it makes sense more financially because yeah, where else are you going to go to reach these audiences?
Yeah, and these audiences are going to get older, right? Like
Yeah.
these are probably the biggest opportunity as far as lifetime value from a brand perspective.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, this was super awesome to go through that article. Is there anything else that sort of from that article that comes to mind that you think is worth sharing?
I think just the one thing that I'm really excited about from Roblox is it feels a little bit like sort of the early days of like comic books, where, you know, you had sort of like tons of new comics coming out and all of these like crazy IPs being developed, and some of them ended up being Marvel, right? And so it's kind of fun to think about just like the opportunity here of like creating an IP that ends up being as big and as meaningful to the world like a Marvel has become.
Yeah, and it seems like I've seen this one particular game, Piggy, which is a top game on the platform, and they have Piggy toys available for sale at Walmart and Target and these sort of big box retailers. And when I see that, they're sitting alongside next to Roblox branded toys. And so Piggy on its own seemingly was able to convince Walmart and Target that, they have a big enough audience on Roblox that it's worth, giving them shelf space within their stores to sell that. And to me, that's just like, wow, like Piggy, is that big, is able to do that. And so they've taken that, they've developed that IP. It seems like, yeah, we're just so at the beginning stages of that. So from again, kind of tying it back to maybe just like overall kind of business market size and opportunity for some developers, and maybe it's not these VC backed ones, maybe the VC backed ones are going down the brand route and servicing brands. But for any developer, yeah, if you can create that IP that can go onto toys, onto t-shirts, and on up to that, and then eventually become a movie and a TV show and a comic book and all those things, the transmedia, like you're saying, like those opportunities are certainly there if you can really kind of formulate that right IP that really strikes a chord.
Yeah. Here's a question. Could a brand, like a typical brand like a NARS or a Sunsilk, could a brand create an IP that ends up being a massive IP? Just a question I'm throwing out into the universe, but I don't have the answer.
Yeah, I think it can come from anywhere, but it just takes the right, the right magic, right? There's no one formula as to, what that looks like. It's interesting that, yeah, what creating a campaign on a platform like Roblox forces brands to do is to think about their brand in a new way. It's like, oh, if we were to have an avatar for our brand, what would it be? Like, is it gendered? Is it male? Is it female? What is it wearing? Is it even human? Like, what does it look like? Suddenly you're thinking about like, hey, what are the brand attributes? What do we care about? And that's one exercise. That doesn't necessarily mean like, oh man, there's a whole bunch of people who want to like be that avatar or play an experience or live in that world. So it kind of comes back to creativity. And I think that's what is definitely at play when it comes to these spaces, is just like, yeah, we want to show up, we want to extend our brand, but it's like, is it going to be fun? Like, are you good at making a game? Can you make it something that like resonates with an audience that's going to want to keep them coming? And if you can do that, right now, I feel like Hello Kitty has done sort of like the best job in the space in terms of creating a fun game, and they already have the IP. But if somebody can come at it from creating the fun game, and that sure, I think it's possible to create IP from there. All right, I'm going to do a quick speed round for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on a couple quick questions.
Okay.
So, what is your favorite metaverse platform?
My favorite metaverse platform, I mean, I think not focusing on sort of the term metaverse and
Sure.
how to interpret that. I think like as far as platforms are concerned, I've played a lot of Fortnite. I played it with my brother and my sister-in-law, and it sort of just has been a great way for me to connect with them. So even though I've spent a lot of time on Roblox, I think I'm going to go with what I prefer to play, which would be Fortnite.
Cool. And then if you could have anyone or anything be your avatar, what would that be?
All right. I'm gonna go with sort of like a Mr. Peanut style, like Mr. Peanut style dog on two, like that's standing upright.
Okay.
The reason this is popping in my head is like my like go-to stuffed animal as a kid was like a dog with two legs and arms, and for whatever reason, Mr. Peanut popped into my head.
Got it. That sounds, yeah. Would it have like what is it, a monocle?
Definitely the monocle.
Monocle, yeah.
And the mustache.
Oh,
You
good.
need it. the weird mustache and the monocle
Yeah,
and the
that's
top hat and the cane. I mean,
the whole thing. Yeah, perfect. That's
but
hey,
on a dog with two legs.
okay. Awesome. And so you are continuing to write. What's a way that people can kind of follow what you're doing?
Yeah, well, definitely subscribe to Naavik. I'm gonna continue to post on that. I don't just write about Roblox. I write about other Metaverse E platforms, UGC game platforms. And then follow me on LinkedIn. I'm always posting sort of commentary on stuff. Um, and then on my Twitter, David in Gaming at David in Gaming.
Cool. All right, David, that was super fun, super enlightening. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen.
All right, thanks again to David. That was a super insightful conversation. Really enjoyed that. To me, there were two takeaways from talking to David. Number one is the challenge of making a break-even game on a platform like Roblox is incredibly hard. You have to, as he said, get into the top 250, which is not easy given how many new games there are, how popular existing games are. So that was number one, the challenges. But number two, the second takeaway was really the potential for Roblox, a platform like that, from a marketing perspective, and how the unit economics of brand marketing and spending those marketing dollars on a platform like Roblox can be highly effective, can be super efficient and affordable relative to other channels out there. And so really excited about, hearing that and discussing that with David. So thanks again, David. If you're interested in following me, you can check me out on LinkedIn. I'm Steven Dypiangco. I'm a Metaverse consultant. My company is Metaverse Marcom. You can check out our website at metaversemarcom.io. We focus on helping entertainment and sports brands enter the metaverse. If that's you, please do reach out. Would love to help and talk more about your business. If you did like this episode, please be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and rate it. Hope you'll also check out some of our past episodes we've done looking at different brands, the ways they've activated on platforms like Roblox, and interviews we've done with other folks as well in the space. All right, thanks so much. I'll see you in the metaverse.